everyone! Welcome. We are happy you're here. 2 weeks ago, we read the first half of Adachi to Shimamura, Volume 5, Chapter 3, Leaving Azure. It seems like Master Taru's painting skills have managed to woo Shimamura. Would the newly revived connection between these two light up the sky like the fireworks they're about to watch? Or would Shimamura's trouble with women extend to Tarumi as well? Would Yashiro be able to try out all the food stalls available in the festival? Let's read and find out. Be sure to not be like Shimamura and attract trouble, and invite your number one friend over to Adashima and chill. It was noon that day when I noticed I'd forgotten something in the classroom. While not shocking enough to drain away all the blood from my face or anything like that, I did still find myself growing stiff as I went through my bag and realized it wasn't there. The item in question was a notebook. Sure, it was kind of odd to bring school equipment with me when the only thing we had scheduled for the day was the end of term ceremony. But let me explain. This was no ordinary notebook. No, I was talking about Shimamura's note. I'll give you one guess as to what was written on its page. Given that there was no reason for anyone to drop by the classroom during the summer break, the chances of the notebook actually being discovered were extremely low. That is what I told myself initially. However, the more I thought about it, the more restless I grew. What if someone did see it? No, that didn't matter. I honestly couldn't care less what others thought. The question was more what would happen if, through some cruel twist of fate, Shimamura were to find the book. I'll, I'll probably die. That was my guess. Blood would shoot from my ears. My head would come clean off. Something like that might actually happen. I really did think so. There was one thing there that was especially bad. So bad that simply the thought of it caused my heart to skip a beat. My eyes, having been open wide, immediately grew dry. The reason why I brought the notebook with me was because I knew Shimamura would be there. And ironically enough, that was also ended up being why I forgot it. Now then, what was I going to do? Should I go grab it? Or should I leave it there until school starts again? School premises were accessible for club purposes, but did that also extend to the building? I wasn't quite sure. Would I need to get permission from a teacher? Or would it be hopeless regardless of what I did? While busy thinking about that, I found that I had at some point stood up and gotten ready to leave. I guess I was going then. Rather than actually deciding to do so, I was more simply conforming to what was happening. Now, now outside, I shifted my focus on something different. My family had been nowhere to be seen when I left the house. Just like usual. I unlocked my bike, hopped on, and began pedaling. A sense of regret immediately filled me as I basked in the sunlight. I really should have worn a hat. Seriously, how long was this heat going to last for? I guess that was a kinda absurd thing to say about summer, but even so, it really was how I felt. Going outside during the night was far and away the better choice on days like these. Walking around the neighborhood lit by the festival lights, walking around with Shimamura.
Hmm.
I decided to make a slight detour. No, this wasn't me taking a look in advance or anything like that. I was just curious. And since I was already here, I might as well. Departing from the school road, I soon found myself pedaling past the river near which the fireworks display next week was going to be held. Various stands would soon litter the area, and I too would be helping out at one of them. Although not really the normal way to do it, this was going to be my first time in ages attending a festival of any sort. The previous time had been with my family. I couldn't remember much anymore. But the few memories I still had of the event mostly had to do with massive crowd of people there and how I'd felt like I was going to choke. As for the brilliance of the fireworks, that had left no impression on me. Not because I didn't care, but rather because the sparks of them simply had not reached me. Nothing inside me had flared up. And yet, here I was, having my heart shaken by the notion of a fireworks display. While it was certainly disappointing that I would have to wait till some indefinite festival after this for my dreams to be realized, my chest continued burning nonetheless. Like most things, this too was something I brought up upon me by Shimamura. Well, what would it be like if we really were to attend a festival together? Before I knew it, I found myself having stopped the bike to think about that question. Ignoring the intense sunlight shining above me, I hopped off and onto the ground.
Right here. Shimamura would stand here, like this.
My hand moved around as I painted her shape in the air. Following this, a series of food stalls rose before me with the river as their backdrop, forming a mirage of the night to come. That was quick. Maybe I should go see a doctor? Shimamura and I would walk side by side. Not just that, we'd have to hold hands in order to avoid losing sight of each other in the sea of people. I'd probably be the one gripping hers, most likely. She'd laugh, comment on how hopeless I was, but ultimately, let me do it. The sleeves of my yukata would be left rubbing against hers. I would feel blood pumping through every inch of my body, even the bottoms of my feet. That was how I imagined us to walk down the night, with me occasionally touching my part of our matching pair of hairpins, aiming for the dim lights hanging in the air. We would float along the river of people, not fighting back against the current, but simply allowing it us to carry our way in. There wouldn't be much space, and though that was bad in its own, it also placed us a full step closer to each other than we normally were. Occasionally, my shoulders would come in contact with hers. Shimamura's hair would be tied up in a bun above her head. That wasn't how she usually wore it, and while it would be kind of weird seeing the sides of her neck fully exposed, I would also wouldn't be able to look away. Um, Her mouth twisted into a light smile. Light would trace the outline of her portrait, one after another. Fireworks would shoot up, filling the sky. The afterglow of each colorful explosion would paint over us too. Truly, there was no greater makeup for Shimamura to wear on a summer night.
Hmm.
I could hear cicadas singing. Kinda strange, considering that there weren't any trees nearby. I also noticed that I'd gotten all sweaty while lost in thought. My eyes burned by the midday sun. Everything before me now appeared tinged green. Indulging in fantasy had left me to be fried by reality. Quickly, I hopped back on my bike. Even now that I was pedaling again, the image of the festival remained stuck in my mind. What should I wear? For a summer festival, a yukata would probably be the right choice. Huh, yeah. I decided to drop by the mall on my way back to buy one. Like they say, there won't be anything to worry about if you're prepared. I'd love to see Shimamura wear one too. Although then again, I could easily imagine her finding it too bothersome. If I ask her to do it for my sake, would she? Maybe? Maybe not? I guess it was pretty strange thing to ask someone. Alongside people fishing, I saw a girl with a paintbrush in hand standing on the riverbank. There was another girl too, her model apparently, although since that one was holding a black parasol and had her back turned against me, I wasn't really able to tell for sure. Quite the thing to do in this temperature. Paying no mind to them, I quickly shifted my attention away. I kind of felt like I've seen the girl standing before the canvas somewhere. However, as I wasn't able to recall her face immediately, I simply ended up giving up. She likely wasn't someone worth remembering anyway. Come to think of it, how many people were there that I truly needed to remember? Quite few. You could likely count them with a single hand. My hand burning after the detour I'd taken, I at last arrived at school. There, a series of shouts resembling the kinds you might make while performing club activities reached my ears, followed by the song of cicadas. I wonder, why was it that their symphony sounded so much louder here than it did at my home? Was it because of the trees growing within the schoolyard? Probably. Whatever the case, it really did feel like there was a cloud of them singing right above my head. I entered through the main gate and headed towards the parking area. There weren't many bikes there, naturally, and although that did mean I could have left my bike right in front, I still went out of my way to place it in the section reserved for my class. This was a pretty common occurrence, I'd noticed, for me to prioritize stability and custom over efficiency. Was that just the sort of person I was?
I hopped off my bike and walked along the side of the building, purposefully making it so that I couldn't be seen from the sports field. It wasn't like I was going to get in trouble if anyone saw me. Rather, I just didn't want it to happen. After that, I soon found myself standing before the front door. What next? I hadn't explained my situation to a teacher, but then again, what was the worst that could happen? With that in mind, I went ahead and gave the door a pull. There was a certain weight to it, and yet, contrary to what I'd expected, it actually opened. Quickly, I grabbed the handle and pushed the door closed. I looked to my left, then to my right. There was no one around. The only thing I could hear was the sound of cicadas singing. Was it okay for me to go in? I wasn't sure. However, what I did know was that I could do so if I wanted to. I decided against putting my shoes in the rack and instead held them in my hand as I walked up the stairs leading to the classroom. Before that came the landing, though, the windows of which I passed while crouching low to the ground, just in case. It really made me seem like a thief, sneaking around like this with my shoes pressed against my side. No doubt it would lead to a massive misunderstanding were anyone to see me, which is exactly why I made an effort to walk as fast as possible. Stairs, and then a hallway. I glanced through one of the windows as I silently walked past it, only to be met by a scenery which appeared practically artificial. The distant blue sky and white clouds really did seem like something you might see painted on a canvas. As much as I hated having to work or be with others, I knew that school was, by its definition, a place where there were people. It simply could not exist without them. I proceeded forward, barefoot, when suddenly I heard a sound other than my footsteps. It was coming from another floor and sounded like students talking, which, thinking about it, really made sense. The reason why the building hadn't been locked appeared to be so that members of cultural clubs could still gather like normal. Right. I continued walking. Maybe it was just our school that did that, but it felt pretty unsafe, in my opinion. With no people around, something might sneak in, like I had. Not that there was anything worth stealing here. Next, I entered the classroom. No sooner had I opened the door than the hot air packed inside hit my face, welcoming me. Summer instantly encapsulated my body in all of its density, to the point where it felt like, were I to wipe my face, literal droplets would fall off. Adding to this, the difference in temperature between the room and the hallway was quite immense, doubly more so when you considered that the only thing separating them was a single door. Was it possible that the place might straight up catch fire with enough time as more and more heat culminated? Maybe. Then again, there wasn't any real need to worry. Summer would likely be long since over by then. While summer and its warmth did symbolize eternity, that was not the case in reality. And by the time you knew it, they'd both be replaced by the cool wind of autumn. Passing through the empty room, I made my way to my desk and twisted over to look. Instantly, relief filled me. I had, in fact, left the notebook here. Shimamura note was safe. Furthermore, it didn't seem like anyone had touched it. Whew. With that out of the way, I flipped the book open and checked its contents. The very text which had caused me all this trouble. Given that simply remembering what was written there was enough to make my heart skip a beat, it wasn't much of a surprise that for a moment I seriously felt like I was going to pass out at the sheer sight of it. What I'd said earlier was true. My head would literally come off were Shimamura ever to see this. The word embarrassed didn't cut it. There was even a chance the outcome could be something worse than that. Like what? Simple. Shimamura might start despising me, avoiding me. As far as the current me was concerned, that was the one thing I feared more than anything. It was possible I was even more afraid of it than I was of dying. It just felt so much more realistic of a worry. That was all to say, I would never again allow this notebook to leave my sight. I shut it closed. Never again. Swearing myself that, I quickly turned around and began making my way outside, only for my legs to come to a full stop as I passed by where Shimamura sat. Had she forgotten anything herself? I peered inside her desk to check. As it turned out, there wasn't anything there, not even dust. I lifted my head, and in that instant, a thought passed through my mind.
Come to think of it,
I remembered a conversation we'd had in the past on the sports hall's second floor. Back in those days, I'd managed to be surprisingly forthcoming in the way I talked, saying that the past me felt like a totally different person wasn't an overstatement. Anyway, putting that aside, here's what Shimamura had said.
I'm allowed to go to the classroom when there's no one there and do all sorts of mischief.
Although my response at that time had consisted of a single, uninterested groan, were she to come out to me with something like that again, there simply was no way that I would be able to maintain my composure. Reminiscing about the past, I crossed my arms. What might the mischief Shimamura had in mind look like in practice? The most she'd ever done to me was place her jaw on top of my head while I wasn't looking, and that obviously wasn't something you could do by yourself, not unless either your scalp or chin were extremely stretchy. Trying to reach a proper conclusion, I walked around the classroom, passing by all the different desks. That was a habit of mine I'd lately become aware of. I often found myself walking in circles while thinking about something. It was likely the case that when my brain was left spinning its wheels, my feet felt like they should do the same. That continued for a while until eventually I was forced to stop as lines of sweat began running down my neck. There was no reason to limit myself to the concept of mischief. Instead, I could look at Shimamura more broadly, in her entirety. Were Shimamura here, right now, what might she think? I could barely make sense of her at the best of times. And yet, at that moment, I really did find myself thinking hard about that question. The effort I put into it was the essence of Shimamura Note, the regular me. You could say that I overthought things and was mostly just left spinning my wheels. And while there was a part of me that felt that way, it wasn't really relevant here. A cloud of warmth ran up my chin. Touching it with my fingers, I realized something. Were Shimamura here, she'd likely think that it was too hot. I should do something about that first. My feet carried me to the window, which I opened. Straight to the window, with no detours or anything. With all of them open, every single one, I bathed in the wind that blasted through. I suppose this also constituted mischief. Two birds with one stone? Well, not that I was planning on leaving the place like this. Distancing myself from the window, I moved to stand in the very center of the classroom. All sorts of sounds flowed in from the outside, almost as if they'd been eagerly awaiting for the opportunity. I could feel it on my skin as the once stagnant air stirred about. There, I decided. I was going to do one more thing I shouldn't. I sat on my desk and stretched out my legs. This was something I could never do if there were people here. My body sinking as if pulled down by gravity, a large sigh escaped my mouth. I could hear my ears ring as blood rushed through them. Were Shimamura here, would she find my current state ridiculous? Would she laugh at me? The sun disappeared behind the dark clouds before I managed to find the answer to that question, and for a moment it became almost dark. The light, which had previously filled the classroom, was replaced by shadows. As if to bridge the gap between those two situations, the withered curtains began to waver ever so slightly. Their message was simply wind. Wind had come. My arms spread wide open. I sat there, allowing the air to blow past me. It still felt lukewarm, and yet that wasn't all. There was more to it. The wind was clearly not stuck in the present. Instead, its aim was in the future towards which it was rushing. I breathed it in, praying that doing so would help me to do the same.
It then came, the day of the festival. There I was, staring into the azure.
No dinner for me tonight. I'll just grab something while I'm out.
I proclaimed that morning, earning a
Hooray!
from Mom, who'd been grating ginger to be used for noodles, coupled with a small dance. Wait, we were having noodles again for lunch? Yes, I know Dad had gotten a whole bunch of them as a gift, but that didn't mean we had to eat them every single day.
Oh, you're going too?
Mom asked my sister. A strange groan left the mouth as she watched the girl nod.
It's quite a thing. When are they going somewhere with that many people when it's hot outside?
Completely agreed.
Well, I mean, you can see the fireworks from our house.
True, but you can hear them. Alright then, take care of her, will you?
Having said that, Mom gave my shoulder a superficial tap. Was she doing this on purpose? Was I really that easy to see through? The answer to both of those questions was likely a yes. Though my mother, the woman really did have a mean personality. Plus, lately, her shoulders had begun appearing quite burly. All those days of hitting the gym were paying off, huh?
Speaking of which, will the two of you be dressed in yukatas?
She spread the sleeve of her clothes as if to demonstrate.
You get us?
It's what you wear when you visit a festival, no?
Oh, right. Yeah, you get that. Hmm, I wonder.
Going out of my way to change clothes felt like a step too far. I was also just reluctant to do it in general. It was almost as if there was something behind me pulling me back. What was that? What's that sensation? I tried attaching a name to it, but that didn't manage find any that fit.
I want to wear one!
My sister exclaimed while raising her hand. Yashiro was here as well, and after a short moment spent observing the situation, she too decided to hop onto the bandwagon, lifting both of her short arms high up into the air. Seriously, where had she even come from?
Just so you know, we aren't talking about getting candy or anything like that.
Oh.
Dejected, the girl drew her hands back in.
Do you even have a yukata in the first place?
Indeed, she does.
The speaker this time was Mom, looking really proud of herself for some reason with her hands pressed against her lips.
She can use my old yukatas from when I was her age. I stored it away, so it should still be good to wear. Still, I think.
Did she doubt herself? That seemed to be the case, as if immediately after she was done speaking, the woman dashed away towards the room with the clothes cabinet. Then, a few moments later, she returned. Her feet really did move fast. I suppose this was yet another positive outcome of visiting the gym. In her hands, she was holding two yukatas folded on top of each other, one red and one pale cyan. They were both patternless in their design, and as you might have expected, their colors appeared slightly faded with time.
The insect repellent I sprayed on these before putting them away means that they should be good to go. Probably.
What's with the constant self-doubting? Are you just trying to make everyone anxious?
Ignoring me, Mom handed the yukatas to my sister. She spread the red one open at first, and immediately you could just see her entire face burst into a smile.
Ah, what weird clothes.
Yashiro commented while observing the situation from the side. If anything, I'd say that the clothes she was wearing were the weird ones here. Not to even mention her hat. What was up with that thing? The hat currently on Yashiro's head was tall and narrow, and almost looked like it'd been woven from tree branches. Fresh leaves and vines picked through the gaps between them, leaving me unsure whether I was looking at something artificial or an actual plant. Coupled with her already bizarre hair, she really did seem like she could be the main character of a children's tale or something. What was such a thing doing in our house? And why was she holding a rice cracker in her hand?
Want to try it too, Yachi?
I suppose it wouldn't hurt to learn about Earthling culture.
All right then. The girl followed and immediately began wrapping herself in the red yukata, prompting my sister to pull it away from her reach.
I think that bluish one will match you better.
I think it would not.
Now, you'll see that I'm right when you put it on. Now, come here.
Yashiro ran away, and spreading the cyan yukata, my sister ran after her. Neither of them seemed particularly serious. Instead, they were just goofing around, having some fun. Quite the thing to do when it was this hot, even inside. I, personally, I felt like I was going to drown in the sweat the second I left the sweet comfort of the electric fan. An extremely exaggerated sigh left Mom's mouth as she watched the two girls run off.
Hmm, is something wrong?
I was just thinking, the way the girl runs, it really resembles you.
Really? What part of it?
The way she holds her hand in front of her.
Uh,
I am talking about the past, when you were smaller. Don't you remember?
no, I must have forgotten.
That was a lie. I could feel my forehead growing ever so slightly warm.
You used to be so cute back then.
Yes, yes. Sorry, I'm not kid anymore.
Yep.
Mom nodded, making it sound like she was agreeing with my statement. Really, how inconsiderate could a person be?
Do some soul searching and see if you can fix that.
Ugh, seriously, shut up.
Now then, what about you? Do you need to find a third yukata?
I'm good. I'll just go there wearing what I always do.
Looking at it objectively, I was pretty similar to Mom in the way I approached things. Plus, sitting idly in my room, listening to fireworks going off in the distance, that didn't seem bad at all. Their sound alone allowed you to perceive their colorful flashes somewhere deep within your mind.
Hey girls, come back here. We're eating noodles now.
I'm back!
Yashiro exclaimed, having instantly returned. It seemed like she'd at some point found enough time to wrap herself in the cyan yukata. No kidding. The cold blue did fit her way better than the bright red. Having walked into the kitchen, Yashiro proceeded to sit down at the dinner table, almost as if she was part of our family or something.
Cold noodles are very good! I like them!
What? Why did she think we ate our noodles cold? While a simple statement, it raised a lot of questions. I spent the next few hours watching the little red and cyan creatures do this and that, sometimes getting dragged in myself until eventually evening rolled around. I was now in the process of getting myself ready for the festival, and already I could see a distinct bug bite on the side of my thigh. So much for those insect spray. I went ahead and scratched it a little with my finger, and immediately the mark grew itchy. Fair enough, I suppose. Poke the hornet's nest and you'll only have yourself to blame for getting stung. The tireless song of the cicadas instantly filled my ears as I stepped outside. I looked up, and floating in the center of the clear sky above, I saw the moon tinge blue. Given that the object let off no light on its own, it was possible to clearly make out all the individual craters and dents going along its surface. I continued staring, and soon a realization hit me. The moon, a common sight during the long summer days, appeared slightly closer than normal today. So much so that it kind of felt like it might start crashing down any second. My eyes grew fixed on the potential looming disaster. I really would like to visit space before I died. That was something I'd dream of when I was a child, and still felt strongly about to this day. In that world of weightlessness, I'd sleep to my heart's content. How might it feel being freed from one of the things that normally bound me? My body stuck under the oppressive, searing atmosphere of heat. It was only my touch which managed to touch the moon. Meanwhile, Yashiro, currently standing next to me, continued playing with my hand. She hadn't asked for permission or anything, making it seem like this was something she just assumed she could do if she wanted to. I considered shaking her off for a moment. However, ultimately I decided against it. There was something about the softness of her hand that really appealed to the weaker parts of my heart, leaving me with no choice but to give in. She was very affectionate, this girl, innocent in the truest sense of the word. Touching her felt like placing my hand in a bowl of clear spring water. A metaphor which also matched her in terms of color, I suppose. I wonder, had she ever touched the moon? She did say that she was an alien, so maybe? Though one of my hands was taken by Yashiro, one was still free. I gave it a quick glance before sticking it out into the opposite side and direction of her. Just as expected, my eyes immediately met with those of my sister, earning a response from the girl.
What?
She muttered, clearly flustered. Her arms trembled, causing the butterflies printed on her red yukata to dance in place. Worth mentioning, she also had a new hairstyle. Her usual long cut was now tied in a bun above her head, overall making her appear slightly taller than normal. Well, not that she was actually taller, not as far as her body was concerned. I waited like that for a moment, with my hands stuck out, until eventually she timidly gripped it. Wasn't this kinda like fishing? Instantly, the image of Hino pulling up a massive fish from the pond came to my mind.
I got a big one.
Satisfied in my catch, I raised my hand up high, only for my sister to headbutt me in the, well, butt.
You're getting punished for that.
Ah,
How exactly did I punish her? Well, let's just leave that part out. In any case, after I was done, the three of us began walking. There was quite a lot of long distance between our house and the river near which the fireworks were going to be shot. I might have considered taking the bus if we lived closer to a station, but as things stood, that wasn't really an option, unfortunately.
come to think of it.
Hadn't something like this happen like during winter as well? I certainly felt like I could remember that. Unless I was completely mistaken, I'd run into Hino there. I wonder, what about the festival tonight? Would she come? If she did, Nakafuji would likely be there with her. Those two truly were inseparable. Did they never get bored of each other? Bored of other person's face, their voice, their behavior? Was there never a moment where one of them felt like having to deal with the other was just a massive hassle? No, mm, never mind. On a second thought, it was likely just the heartless me who saw things that way.
You could obviously never get tired of your own family. Given that, I suppose it was fair to think of the relationship between Ino and Nagafuji as something similar, an extension of the same idea, an extension of family. That was kinda incredible, wasn't it? Using relationships like that to grow its definition? Ino and Nagafuji. The next person who came to my mind was Adachi. Maybe I should have asked her to come too? Thinking about that, I glanced at my sides.
Hmm.
Had I been alone, that would have been one thing. But with my sister, Yashiro, and Tarumi all here, I could hardly imagine her being interested in tagging along. Even if it didn't feel like it had been really that long, the fact that I'd hung with Adachi for about a year now meant that I more or less had a grasp on her nature. As such, I could say with confidence that she wasn't a very cooperative person. Take someone like that and toss them in a group, and at the end of it, all you've accomplished was making everyone involved feel unpleasant. Given that Adachi herself was someone well aware of that fact, you could even say that she was acting conscientious by not coming. That was the kind of person Adachi was. And yet, when around me, she often acted like a total baby. Did that mean I was closer to her than other people? Why was it, I wonder, that she'd taking such a liking to me? I could ask her directly, but then again, the only thing I could imagine this leading to was her completely losing her composure. The thought of it kinda made me laugh. Whether or not I invited her didn't really matter. At some point, an opportunity would naturally arise for us to visit a festival together. We talked about it just the other day. Plus, summer was long. With those as my argument, I decided to put the matter aside for now, trusting that it would sooner or later work itself out. I was of the opinion that forming strict plans went against what school breaks were about, especially considering that this one had just begun. Then again, I thought the same every year, only for the eventual end of it to catch me by surprise. It never stopped feeling sad when it happened. As we made our way through the river near which the firework display was going to be held, the different streams of people began merging into one. I was quite shocked to see how many yukatas there were. Really, I'd even go as far as to say that most of the girls appeared to be wearing Japanese clothes. A mix of emotion passed through my mind as I glanced down at my own shabby getup. Then again, it wasn't like I was alone. There were plenty of people wearing just regular shirts and shorts, probably even more than there would normally be considering how warm it was. Putting all that aside, what really caught my attention was just how much more crowded the street was now.
Make sure to hold my hand tight, okay?
Having to look for them would be a massive pain if they were to get lost. Well, my sister at least. The way Yashiro showed meant that you couldn't exactly lose sight of her.
I'm not a little kid anymore!
Grip, grip, grip.
While the reaction of the two couldn't have been more different, both of my hands did ultimately end up being squeezed. The stream of people continued its flow, first passing by a large hotel and then turning into the direction of the park. Given that there were no paid seats or anything like that, things were bound to get congested as everyone rushed to reserve a spot with a good, open view of the sky. Then again, most of those were likely taken already, especially when you consider that a not insignificant number of people had elected to set up camp right in the morning. Personally, I had no intention of acting that enthusiastic about it. Fireworks wouldn't be shot high in the air if the way you were supposed to enjoy them was up close. Speaking of, though we couldn't see anything yet, the distinctive sounds of explosion did reach us.
Ah, there she is.
Under the shadow cast by an apartment building, I saw her. I saw Tarumi. She had her phone out and was currently fiddling with it. Was she planning to call me? Perhaps to see where I was? Something I hadn't considered earlier hit me as I stared at her. While we had, in the general sense, agreed to see each other at a specific time, as for where we were going to meet, that hadn't been decided. And yet, here she was. Had she known that this road led from my house all the way to the river and figured that I'd come by it? Smart thinking, Taru. Not that this excused us for not choosing a place to meet, because seriously, we really should have done so.
Ooh, Shima!
Having at last noticed me back, Tarumi put her phone away and proceeded to wave at me. There, her hand still in the air, she waved through the crowd and closed the distance between us. Comparing her to the other people around her once again get a sense of just how tall she was.
Shima!
Yep.
Though already right in front of each other, we still continued waving our hand. Seriously, what was up with that? I couldn't help but smile a little, prompting Tarumi to immediately do the same. Unlike me, Tarumi had actually put in the effort to wear her yukata, the peony pattern of which appeared quite colorful under the light of the lamp. Her long hair was also tied up neatly, all in all giving the same sort of impression as the people you often saw in fashion magazines. That was certainly nice, although on the flip side, it did leave me as the odd one out. I almost felt like, whereas everyone was actually trying, I simply chose to wing it. Or better put, like I was a mere bystander, barely part of the group. So, like usual then? Hmm, yeah, I suppose.
Um, so, this one's your little sister, right?
Tarumi asked, after spending a few moments comparing the hair color of the two girls, ultimately turning her body into the direction of my sister. Reasonable guess. Really, it would have been quite strange if she'd gone with Yashiro instead. Abnormal, even. As for the girl in question, well, a slight change in both the angle of our hand as well as the strength with which she gripped it let me know even without looking, that she'd timidly taken a step backwards.
It's been a while. Well, not that we really remember each other, I guess. I used to come by your home often when I was in grade school. So, yeah.
Terumi stated, pointing at her own face, all the while smiling in a very forced manner. The lack of reaction coming from my sister suggested that she couldn't remember her at all.
Anyway, nice to meet you. Hope we can get along.
Okay.
The girl replied faintly, the look on her face remaining perfectly meek. I couldn't help but giggle silently as I stared at her. She was so good at putting on the facade of a good child that the mask seller at the festival might soon be out of a job. It didn't take long for her to catch wind on how I was reacting based on the way my hand moved, prompting her to once again slam her head against my backside and... never mind. We can skip that part. I just want to say one thing. Handing out punishment with both my hands reserved was quite the ordeal.
So then, this is that other person you mentioned?
I am the other person,
She nodded in response.
Yashiro Chikama.
That was her full name? I'd completely forgotten. I always just called her Yashiro. And as for my sister, well, she had her own nickname for her, Yachi.
Wow! Your hair shows something.
Timidly, Terumi placed her hand on Yashiro's head. Had she really not noticed her hair earlier? Just what had she been looking at instead? Oh, me? Well, it was already far too late to be worrying about it. The thought did kinda make me blush.
Now then, shall we get going?
It looks like it's gonna be kinda tough, but sure.
I stated back, stretching out my body and scanning the road up ahead. Distinct wall of people had begun forming there. While it was quite a terrifying sight in its own right, what made it worse was that the way they slowly flowed forward, almost as if they were made of some sort of thick goop. For a moment, I found myself hesitating. Were we really going to be taking part in this? As far as mosquitoes were concerned, tonight was likely going to be a real feast. We began moving. Meanwhile, the largest of all the fireworks, the sun, continued growing distant. In its wake, it left all the heat and warmth it brought about. Exiting the stage was a coming night by itself, alone. Good grief. Even children knew to clean away their toys when they were done playing. Smiling wryly, I sucked that in the lukewarm air. In terms of the solar system, the sun was definitely the oldest adult, which was exactly why I would have liked it to keep the concept of discretion in mind.
Hmm.
Terumi turned her attention toward my hands, specifically the end that Yashiro was squeezing.
Is something wrong?
This simple question was enough to make her flinch. What a reaction! I was immediately reminded of Adachi.
I was thinking, you sure do act like a big sister. Even now.
Oh?
I kinda remembered Hino pointing this out earlier, that my big sister level was very high, or something in that vein. Even so, I didn't really want to be Yashua's older sister. That'd be just awkward. To be completely honest with you, I personally didn't see myself being suited for that role. I simply wasn't like that.
You feel so adult now. Completely unlike how you used to be.
Really? I get the impression you're just saying that.
No sooner had those words come out of my mouth than my entire face twitched. I really needed to do a better job refraining from saying the first thing that came on my mind. Tarumi instantly looked away, although as I waited for a bit, she did soon enough turn her eyes back toward me. There, giggling as little as if to hide embarrassment, she spoke.
Your hands sure seem to be popular, Shima. Do you offer them out on subscription basis?
My hands? Oh, you mean this?
I lifted my hands slightly in the air and gave them a quick glance. Indeed, they were both taken away already. Hmm. Was she perhaps disappointed? Seriously, what was it about my hand that made everyone want to hold them so badly?
Now, I almost wish I would have come pick you up at your house instead of waiting for you here.
Tarumi mumbled deeply, her arms crossed. The way her brows and the concern of her eyes crumpled together made it seem like this wasn't meant as a joke. That actually wasn't a bad idea. Meeting her at either one of our homes would have made everything so much simpler and less complicated.
And yet, the thought of it hadn't even crossed my mind. It was really there in that fact you could get a good sense of all the years that had gone by between us. Mm, it was hard to put it into words. We were both standing on tiptoes, stretching ourselves beyond our abilities, something like that.
In that case, allow me to lend you my hand.
The speaker this time was Yashiro, swiftly pushing out her free hand into Tarumi's direction. I was kinda shocked to see her join the conversation. Honestly, at first, I thought she was just making random noises.
Um, okay, thanks.
Tarumi's reaction was very typical of her. Though clearly bewildered, she didn't hesitate for a moment to grab the girl's hand. As for Yashiro, well, with both her hands held high by people tall under her, she was kinda just left dangling there in the air. The image reminded me of an alien being dragged away by men dressed in black, like in a story I'd once heard. Awkwardly, I let out a small laugh, and so did Tarumi.
Don't worry. She's not a bad girl, even if she is a bit weird.
Well, probably. The impression I got of her was that she was less a virtuous person and more simply acting in accordance with what she'd been taught. You know, like help people who are in trouble. The kind of stuff parents told their children. There was no consideration of loss and gain mixed in, no judgment of what was right and what was wrong. Not even children were safe from the competitiveness that plagued the modern one, making people like her a very rare sight these days. Abnormality, you may say.
Right. Still, I honestly didn't think you'd come. Shima.
I could practically feel emotion in Tarumi's voice as she said this, still holding onto Yashiro's tiny hand. The sound of her silence was very noticeable as well.
And why is that?
Well, it was one thing in the past, but these days you always find everything so bothersome and. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean it like that.
Cutting her sentence short, Tarumi quickly slammed her hand in front of her mouth. Was she worried she said something that I might take offense to?
What I'm trying to say is. You're lazy. Wait. No, that's not it either.
No, no, go on.
It was honestly kinda interesting to see just how deep she would dig herself, which is why I decided to not say anything. Still, if I had to ask, was that really a fair judgment of my character? I agreed to pose for her painting just the other day, hadn't I?
You're non-committal. No, no, no. Uh, hard to please? Oh, someone who prefers to stay at home? Um, mm, ah, damn it. Can't come up with a good way to put it.
Lost in the maze that was language, Tarumi gripped her head with her one free hand. I found it very amusing watching her do that. As much as she doubted herself, the things she listed were all honestly pretty solid descriptions of me. At the same time, were I to go ahead and laugh innocently, I would probably be able to recall at least some of what made the past me the person I was back then, huh? I certainly felt there to be an opportunity. The only problem was I simply didn't have it in me to force myself to take the necessary step forward. The concept of returning to the past, to the old days, hardly seemed that appealing to me. No matter how worn, how damaged, how cheap, if there really did exist something between us, something real, you should be able to see it even now.
Oh, oh,
My line of thought was interrupted all of a sudden. Yashiro began jumping up and down. How did she manage to do that when her feet were barely touching the ground?
I can smell something sweet.
The avenue with all the food stands was still quite far away, and yet the girl already had her nose pointing upwards. She always acted so like how a regular person would, even when it came to these sorts of small, insignificant interactions. Really went to show that it wasn't just her appearance that was suspicious. What lay beneath was very much so as well. I suppose you could call it fate, the fact that I was now here, heading towards a summer festival while holding hands with her. Putting all that aside for a moment, my sister sure was behaving herself. I even had to check that I hadn't accidentally lost sight of her, but no, she was still there. While her eyes weren't pointing towards the ground or anything like that, she also wasn't saying anything. Rather, she was simply walking forwards in complete silence. This was how she usually acted around new people. I went ahead and gave her dented cheek a quick poke. This prompted the girl to frown at me.
What?
She snarled.
You aren't speaking, so I wonder if you were tired.
Wonder if you need me to talk to you. I didn't actually say that last part out loud. I wonder what sort of face would she make if I did. Personally, I was of the opinion that duty was first on the list of things that you should never feel towards your family members. And as such, I did often find myself wondering, was I looking after her just because she was my little sister? The order of things definitely did make sense there. It would have been a lot stranger if it was the other way around, but Even so, I had to ask, was that really something that could last? There were too many people on the Riverside Road when we got there, making it so that we had to walk in a line to have any hope of passing through. And yet, neither Yashiro nor my sister let go of my hands. The position this put me in was awkward to say the least, almost as if both of my arms were being bent backwards. Naturally, walking like that, with my shoulders stuck out, left me constantly bumping with my surroundings. It wasn't very pleasant, I'll tell you that. I was almost starting to view the whole thing a bit negatively when all of a sudden gold dust sprinkled down from the sky, as if shining light into my situation. How long had it been since I last seen a firework go off in person? Years, probably.
Look, Yachi! That's a firework!
My sister explained to Yashiro, breaking her silence. She almost sounded a bit proud of herself. The girl exclaimed back, her eyes pointing towards the golden particles above and her mouth half open in awe. I wonder how these flowers blowing in the sky appear in the eyes of an alien. Was she able to see value in them? Joking, obviously. At least in part. As soon as the flashes of the firework faded away, another one, equally vivid, was created in its place. It was almost as if the entire cycle of a star, from birth to death, was compressed right there before me. This sequence repeating without an end closer than even the moon. Witnessing such a sight, I couldn't help but feel slightly moved. We continued walking forwards, as if lured by the fireworks. There, a tightly packed line of booths, extending by the roadside with no gaps in between, appeared in our sight, causing Yashiro to grow extremely excited.
Oh! Oh!
Clearly, this was far more important to her than the fireworks.
Shimamura! Shimamura!
Yes, yes, I know.
The girl proceeded to yank my arm with far more strength than you might have expected from someone of her size. I decided not to resist, in part because, having skipped dinner, I was kinda hungry myself. It was clear what we were going to be doing next. However, before that, I quickly turned towards Tarumi to confirm that she was okay with it.
Do you mind if we go take a quick look?
Sure, it's fine. I haven't had dinner yet either.
Perfect timing, Lily, she added, her eyes pointed at the stand. Staring at her face, a thought crossed my mind. She hadn't spent the entire day waiting for me at that spot, had she? No way. I mean, we weren't talking about Adachi here.
The sweet smell appears to be coming from here!
Now standing in front of the booth, the large paper lanterns hanging from which painted its red roof slightly orange, Yashiro's nose moved up and down as she sniffed the air. Out of all the similarly colored booths around it, this one had by far the biggest and most eye-catching sign.
Good luck, Takoyaki. What's that?
My fate came to a stop as the bizarre text caught my attention. Right in an instant, a woman emerged from inside, dressed in what appeared to be a robe with long sleeves, a bit fear from the warm night considering its apparent lack of breathability. Her red cheeks stood out against her pale skin, and looking at her, the image that came to my mind was more of that of a candy apple rather than takoyaki.
Welcome! Welcome!
Hi?
Only one serving of our takoyaki in a pack of 8? has octopus in it.
What?
But the sign, I tried pointing out, only for the woman to completely ignore me.
The lucky person who finds themselves tasting octopus will get to take a fortune slips for free.
Here, she added while emphasizing the box set up next to her. It seemed like just a random pile of paper tickets to me.
In addition, the person whose fortune slips grant them great luck will receive one palm reading session free of charge. Truly, they are fortunate.
Uh-huh.
Not only that, if the result of the palm reading is not to your liking, you're always able to change your fate by purchasing an extra pack of takoyaki and
Okay, I think we'll go somewhere else.
ah,
That was close. You could never be too careful as there are always people out there trying to trick you, especially at festivals like this.
may I just tell you one thing? One piece of advice.
Huh?
The woman now stood next to me. But how? When? I was sure she'd been inside a booth just a second ago. Her plain face and get up made it difficult for me to imagine that she'd somehow managed to walk over to me while I wasn't looking. And yet, that was the only explanation I could come up with. I was left utterly bewildered. I did have a second question too. Why was she following us?
In your future, I can see. Oh, trouble with women.
Uh,
The woman standing pointing finger drew a circle in the air before me. Seriously, what the heck was this person doing? Saying stuff like that out of nowhere. Um, now that I thought about it, she had mentioned palm reading, hadn't she? Yeah, a fortune teller, perhaps?
um, but I am a woman.
Trouble with men isn't really something you hear people talk about when it comes to vision, is it? No, no, it's not.
This answer of hers, if you can even call it that, left me just as confused as I'd been before. Slightly unsure as to what I was supposed to do here, I took a step backwards. Had I gotten myself involved with some weirdo?
It says that on my face.
No, on your hand. I specialize in palm reading.
I looked down. Both of my fists were tightly clenched. I looked back up. The woman was now grinning at me. Not all about it. This person was nothing but trouble.
Thanks for the advice. Now, goodbye.
I quickly began distancing myself from the woman. Much to my surprise, she didn't chase me further. Instead, she simply waved in my direction, wishing me well. The river of people then swallowed us both, and soon it became impossible for me to see her. Uh, what, what, what had just happened? I really didn't know.
Trouble with woman. Huh.
That's what she said. Yeah.
For some reason, it was Tarumi who appeared the most bothered by this whole thing. Was she perhaps reminded of something she'd experienced personally?
Ah! Shimamura! There's something good over there, I'm sure of it!
What Yashiro pointed toward next was a booth selling tiny sponge cakes. On its sign were written the words, contains honey, egg, milk, where you were required to warm those things if you wish to obtain a sales license? I could only assume so. Anyway, I glanced at Yashiro's face to gauge her reaction, and instantly, with no hesitation, I was able to tell that she wanted to try these sweets out. If only the question on school's exam was this easy. Unlike the previous booth, there were no special events or anything of the sorts going on there, which thankfully meant that we were able to purchase what we wanted without too much hassles. Having to deal with stuff was just so tiresome, and in all honesty, I way preferred it when things were simple like this. Really. The only problem, if you could even call it that, was the fact that I had to be the one to pay. My sister naturally was penniless, and as for Yashiro, well, I had no interest in trying to make sense of her financial situation. Sounds of satisfaction filled the air as the latter of the two girls hungrily devoured part of the cake they had split between them.
What?
I'm glad.
Now, what about the chicken over there?
Oh, you.
Don't go oogling at more fruit while your mouth is still full. The way Yashiro was acting here almost made it seem like she was usually kept in hunger. I really couldn't let her run loose, because if I did, there was no doubt my wallet would be left feeling mighty light by the time the night came to an end. The only thing heavy would be my feet, tired from walking around. With that in mind, I gripped her hand tighter, pulling on it like a leech each time she attempted to head toward the next booth. Even so, that wasn't enough. The smells, the atmosphere, and most importantly, her constant pestering eventually grew too much for me to endure, and ultimately, I was left with no choice but to cross the road with my head hung.
Yeah! Shimamura!
Seriously? Shut up.
Personally, I didn't really want to eat chicken right now. No, I was more in the mood for yakisoba. My throat hungered for noodles, specifically a type other than what we ate daily back at home.
Wow, no kidding. You really are good at playing the role of a big sister, Shimamura.
Tarumi stated in a slightly teasing tone. Now dashing after me, that comment of her didn't sit right with me. Not at all. Swiftly, I offered a rebuttal.
Well, what can I say? I've had a lot of experience. I remember constantly dragging you along back when we were little.
I was honestly pretty shocked how smoothly the word came out of my mouth. I felt no reluctance. It hadn't taken any time. I just said it. A second passed, and another emotion filled my mind. Embarrassment. Seriously, why would I blurt something out without pointing any thought to it? Terumi instantly grew stiff. Was she perhaps shocked as well? Whatever the case, she seemed to recover far quicker than I did.
Right.
A wide, childish grin appeared on her face. With the faint festival light shining behind her, the sight really did look something straight out of a dream. We continued much in the same manner from there on, doing this and that. Then, after some time, it began. It just finished slurping my noodle when the sound of fireworks hit my ears, making the start of the show. I could hear people around us cheer as lights of all seven colors filled the sky.
Pretty.
I went ahead and commented, while not the most original thing in the world, it was what came to my mind at the moment. Then, with that done, I turned my attention to my sister.
Hmm. Can you see?
she muttered. In other words, no. Clearly the tall adults in front of us were blocking her sight. I guess I didn't really have a choice then.
Tara, could you take care of Yashiro?
Having said that, I let go of the girl's hand, placing both of mine under my sister's arm.
Huh? What? What?
She exclaimed, visibly shaken by how fast things were happening. Although she was a bit heavier than I remembered, I did manage to lift her up without too much trouble. There, holding her in the air, I repeated my earlier question.
Can you see?
Yeah.
Now facing forward, the girl nodded her head in a surprisingly meek manner. While I couldn't say for sure that what Ino had meant by the term big sister level, for me it seemed well represented by the height at which I held my sister. Yashiro, in turn held by Tarumi, sounded like she was really enjoying herself as well. Well, to be fair, when didn't she?
Can you manage?
Is she too heavy? I went ahead and clarified.
Yeah, no problem.
Tarumi replied, all the while awkwardly looking around. You could hear some bewilderment in her voice, bewilderment aimed toward Yashiro.
I'll be fine. Or rather, what's up with this girl? She's so, um, fluffy? Like, super light.
Yeah, she's weird like that.
I feel like you're kinda weird too, Shima, for being able to ignore it so easily.
Now that's a bad thing, she added quietly, or at least that's how it sounded to me. I hadn't been expecting her to say anything. Combined with all the noise and people talking around us, it was really difficult for me to interpret the meaning behind her words. She didn't think it was a bad thing. Was that so?
Hmm.
I brought my face right up to Terumi's ear so that my sister, currently enthralled by the fireworks, wouldn't hear what I was about to say. Why did she act so startled as I did that? I wasn't sure. Regardless, I then began talking.
Sorry about today. For bringing my sister along and stuff.
While I had already apologized on the phone, I felt it to be necessary to do so in person as well. I was going as far as to force her to tend to Yashiro here after all.
Oh, sure.
Terumi muttered at first. However, quickly after, she drew her chin and did a second take.
No, I mean, it's fine.
The expression on her face didn't appear at all forced. Rather, I was left with the impression that she really stood by her word. Her eyes and cheeks, so smooth it almost looked like someone had gone and brushed them with sandpaper, became painted with the color of the sky.
Personally, I was thinking that I first wanted to have some good fun with you, Shima.
First,
Yep, first.
Leaving the explanation there, Tarumi turned to look at the firework. Those words of hers were clearly meant to represent something, and yet they received no follow-up. Regardless, as I stared at Tarumi's eyes, pointed toward the sky as if gazing into the future, a feeling of a certain type filled me. A pleasant feeling. So pleasant that I could almost feel the non-existent wind blowing against my cheek.
I see.
I did for a moment consider asking her to continue, but ultimately decided not to. Doing so just felt crude to me. Fireworks might have been pretty, but you wouldn't want them to last forever. It was similar to that. Them being fleeting was exactly what differentiated them from mere graffiti.
So, yeah, that's that. Anyway, now I know it's super late for this, and it's kinda whatever, but
A forced cough left her mouth. What was going on? Just as I was thinking about that, Tarumi, still holding Yashiro in her arm, took a step toward me. She then lifted her chin slightly.
could I get a compliment? Even a short one will do.
I was initially left wondering what on earth could she have possibly meant by that. However, after a bit more time spent watching her awkwardly and exaggeratedly shake the sleeve of her yukata, I finally got it.
Ah,
It seemed that she was asking for an opinion regarding our outfit. Her ears were now bright red. Strange, considering that none of the fireworks were of that shade.
Come on, Shima. D- d- don't make me literally spell spell it out.
Tarumi announced, her voice full of embarrassment. It sounded like she was both laughing and crying at the same time.
sorry about that.
I apologized, unable to help but laugh a little myself. Was it or was it not a compliment saying that she looked like a girl straight out of a fashion magazine? Struggling to find the words, I scanned her up and down with my eyes. Her left foot moved around awkwardly, and after staring at it for a little while, it finally came to me.
You look radiant.
I stated frankly. It really was the way I felt. Still, I wonder how was Terumi going to interpret that comment. I was just thinking about that when all of a sudden the strangest giggle left her mouth. Her expression was stiff, and her mouth now resembled a cream roll.
E- even even more so than the fireworks? Just kidding.
Yep, you're glittering.
I repeated, prompting Terumi for some reason to cough in a very exaggerated manner. So exaggerated that I couldn't help but wonder, how was it that these comments appeared to her? I mean, I wasn't lying. She did shine. The light itself was coming from Yashiro's hair, sure, but we could just omit that part. It was there, on a certain July day, that an old friendship was renewed under a sky filled with fireworks. If I get the diary, no doubt that would be the part I wrote it tonight. The thought kinda made me laugh. Shimamura. My voice trembled as I watched her walk into the distance. The world around me began whirling, everything collapsing into a single vortex, in the middle of which she stood. Hearing the vivid voice of the three, four if you counted hers, caused me to grow unsteady. It was like I alone had been cut off. For an instant, the light of the firework above diluted the darkness of the night, turning it azure. Shimamura.